Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Stories of Service podcast. I'm once again on full screen, and I do this sometimes when I need to frame an episode that is a difficult subject. And today I'm tackling, once again, another very, very difficult subject. And we already have quite a few number of people on this call because we're going to be talking about false accusations. Now, if you guys know me, you know that I have covered gosh knows how many episodes about sexual assault. And I am just as passionate about the due process system when it goes both ways. So, for as many people I know who have been harmed by sexual assault with little to no consequences, there have now been as many, if not more, people that unfortunately were politically caught up in a movement that unjustly punished warriors. And today I'm going to talk to one of those who was very scared about speaking up. And it's an incredible act of bravery that he's doing so, but he's doing so on this World Day for International Justice, which I couldn't think of a better day to do this. And I'll be talking today to Darin Lopez. But before I even go into that, I also want to emphasize that I'm also bringing somebody else on that you guys didn't know about. And he agreed to come on at the last minute, and he's here in a position of support. And his name is Keith Barry. And if you've been following this issue with false accusations, you will know exactly who Keith Barry is. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring all three of them, three, meaning me too, on full screen. And then I'm going to read you a little bit about the both of them. And then we're going to dive right into Darin's story. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about Keith. So for those of you who don't know who Keith is, it's very important that you listen to this first as we go into this story so that you understand why this cause means so much to all of us. So with that, Darin, how are you doing today?
Good. Pleasure to be here.
And Keith, thank you so much for being here.
Glad to be here, guys.
Awesome. So first off, I'm going to tell you guys a little bit about Darin. Darin Lopez is a U.S. Navy veteran with over 12 years of military intelligence experience, having undergone rigorous FBI background checks and held roles across multiple branches, including support for Navy, Army, Marine Corps, Air Force, Coast Guard, and Special Forces unit. Academically, he held multiple degrees, 2 associate degrees in social science and applied sciences with a focus on intelligence operations, a bachelor's in business administration, technology management, and an MBA in marketing. His education reflects a multidisciplinary foundation in psychology, communication, and operational strategy. And despite this distinguished service, he became the target of a wrongful sexual assault conviction, among the largest documented cases involving undue command influence, resulting in 3 years of confinement and a lifetime labeling as a sex offender. But undeterred, while in the brig, he studied case law and advocated as a brig lawyer for fellow detainees. After release, he authored The Sailor versus UCI, a detailed expose calling for military justice reform, and has since become a leading advocate for constitutional protections for service members falsely accused of crimes. Keith Barry is a retired U.S. Navy Senior Chief Special Warfare Operator, Navy SEAL. Go Navy SEALs. As you guys know, I have a huge soft spot for the Navy SEALs, especially most recently as I've become friends with quite a few of them because of my support for Pete Hegseth and the Hegseth Confirmation. He has over 25 years of honorable service, and despite a distinguished record and multiple combat deployments, he was falsely accused in 2013 following the end of a relationship and wrongfully convicted in 2014 of sexual assault, a case deeply compromised by unlawful command influence. And what made this case even more shocking was that there was an affidavit at his second appeal from a Rear Admiral Patrick Lorge, who had a guilty conscience. And I have the affidavit here, and probably during the call, I'll be reading some portions of it. I'm sure it will come up, where he determined as the convening authority that Keith Barry was innocent. But instead of doing the right thing at that time, he unfortunately fell victim to unlawful command influence. But thank God, at a later time, he made the right decision. And in his case, it is what I would call the smoking gun of this issue. So I'll read a little bit about that. In 2018, the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Armed Forces overturned his conviction and dismissed the case with prejudice, citing prosecutorial misconduct, fully restoring his rank, yet still to this day ignoring the CAAF orders to fully restore all rights, pays, and privileges. And Keith is a future guest, so we will talk more about this on a future show. Since his exoneration, Barry has become an advocate for military justice reform, and that's why he's here today in a support capacity, exposing how external pressures from political agendas to command influence continue to erode the integrity of court-martial proceedings. Welcome again. And I almost forgot to do this, but I always do this before every show for an introduction from my father, Charlie Perry.
From the moment we're born and lock eyes with our parents, we are inspiring others. By showing up as a vessel of service, we not only help others, we help ourselves. Welcome to S.O.S, Stories of Service, hosted by Teresa Carpenter. Hear from ordinary people from all walks of life who have transformed their communities by performing extraordinary work.
All right. So, Darin, I'm going to start with you. Tell me a little bit about where you were born and raised and what made you decide to join the Navy.
Well, I'm from a place called Beaumont, Texas. It's probably the oil capital of the United States, and it's a very great place to be from. I'm proud. I'm a very proud Texan. Just to say that. There's tears of proudness of say America, Texas, family, all that stuff. Faith. Very proud Texan. I grew up here, just like every other Texan, playing out in the woods, playing sports. Uh, and you could probably put those two together, and it would take up 99% of my youth. Working out, doing all those things, and you know, did the whole school thing, did good, had good grades, never was a problem. Um, Left for college, I went to college locally here. Um, and it was somewhere around my first year of college that I realized that there was just a huge void, and I didn't know what that void was. Like I had to do some soul searching and figure out what that was. And as you'll read in the book, once again, Sailor Spy versus UCI, written by me, you'll learn a lot about me and the whole story. Um, but the reason I joined is because of a void. I wanted to do something. I felt like I was wasting my time. And at that time, it was, we're post 9/11. We don't know what's going on at that time. Um, I did reach out to mentors. They gave me great advice. And I ultimately ended up making that decision, going up, swearing, raising my right hand, swearing
Right.
in to support and defend the Constitution, and enter the unknown, just like everybody else that does it. And I don't, to this day, I don't regret it.
And you had a very successful Navy career. I mean, when I read a little bit about it in your book, I mean, you were an IS, and tell
Mhm.
me a little bit about sort of those early years. I mean, were you enjoying the Navy, and did you think that you were going to stay in for a long time?
Well, when I joined, like I said, you join the unknown. In this field, you're never going to know everything. And so those unknowns are always kind of, you're uncertain about, you don't really
Sure.
know, what's next, what else, what other, continue, you go down that rabbit hole, and you continue to go down rabbit holes, unfortunately. But fortunately, because we have these capabilities, and um, it does help keep the homeland safe. And so, um, originally, like I said, you'll read in the book, I did prepare and join to be a SEAL, and that's why I have so much respect for SEALs. My first contact with a SEAL was with I had a cousin who was my age. We were 14. He had cancer, and it was brain cancer. And they said there's Navy SEALs coming up. I was like, well, what's a Navy SEAL? And they came up, and the guy was just so I don't even know the right word. Like he just seems so genuine and so influential, and so I just saw that and I was like, man, I hope I can be like that one day. I mean, and that's why I was always in sports, running. I mean, I played every sport. I was athlete of the year, got trophies, and all the typical young man, alpha male type stuff or whatever. But I also had good grades, so I won't say just complete alpha male. So I am an academic as well. So, uh, yeah. Um,
Well, I think that speaks for itself. I mean, everything that you tell us about in the book and everything I've known about you, and you and I have been in very close contact for the past several months, and
oh yeah, you vetted me
I
hard.
I
Yeah.
did, because for those of you who don't know, Darin was the first person to approach me about this issue. I always had heard that this happened, and in fact, Sarah Carroll told me about Keith. And so that Keith, you were the first person I've heard about who had talked to the media, that I knew had talked to the media. But I know that for a number of years, and I'll just go to you very quickly, for a number of years you didn't talk about this. And tell me a little bit about why you didn't.
Certainly. I don't want to take much time from Darin, but let me begin by applauding Darin for the courage to speak up. I didn't have the courage. This is an injury. This is a moral wound, much like we would encounter in combat, but we got done with one war and we got thrown into another. And the enemy is far greater than we'd ever experienced. We're fighting the U.S. government. Darin and I spoke about it. You're playing chess against chess masters in the dark, and they can just change the rules as they deem fit. So I didn't want to speak about my experiences until I had reached a point of healing that I wasn't going to be speaking out of anger. So I am impressed and how Darin has handled this. I know the weight that he's carrying on his shoulders. I know how exhausting this is to go through, not just for him, but for so many others. And I applaud him. And he is the epitome of not leaving anybody behind.
Keith,
Thank you
that's
for
so well
that.
said. And that's exactly what I thought. As I looked at your website and as I read your book, I knew that you had covered this case in a way that nobody else had. And I knew that I wanted to bring your story forward because of that. I wanted to show this larger issue. So we're going to go into your story and we're going to talk about what happened, because I
Okay.
think that we need to share that and people need to understand where this begins. So take me
Right.
back to where you were when this incident first occurred.
Oh, okay. There's a lot of things that, like we spoke about before, a lot of things I'm gonna have to talk around. And if they don't make sense, go to the website. There's documentation with receipts. Like I said, read the book, and I'll do what I can to my best of my ability here. So where would you like
Mhm.
for me to start?
That's good. Yeah, and before we get started, do apologize for not putting out my disclaimer as an active duty member. I always have to remember that my podcasts are in my unofficial off-duty capacity, and anything I say or anything that my guests say are not on behalf of any organization and are their own personal views. So definitely want to get that out of the way. I think where I want to start is, how did this is obviously a sexual assault allegation. So tell me a little bit about what led up to you having this allegation. Like how did this come about? That's where we want to start.
Okay. So I guess where we would start is
And Keith,
nothing
I am going to
abnormal.
put you in the backstage from this point, just because I think you and I can just go over this. All right, go ahead,
Okay.
Darin.
Yeah, so I'm doing I'm in a high speed command. We're doing training all the time. I get sent off to another place. Then we're working, 14, 16-hour days, really tiring, but it's around the holiday. And we were fortunate enough to have like a break. Most time when you go to places like this, you don't get a break. Now we actually got a break. And so I drive around town and I see it's like a ghost town because most people took that opportunity to go home for the holidays because a lot of them were from, in that general area. And for me, like I told Keith, I said, I have bills to pay. So, I didn't really take that, I couldn't go home. And so I was like, okay, well, I'll just make the best of it. So I drove around and, navigated that area that I was at. Um, I ended up going to, I was like, okay, well, I'll go see a movie because the new 007 had just came out that year. And I was like, okay, well, I'll go see that. So I get to the movie theater and it's closed because it's part of the mall. And everything was closed for the holiday and the stand down and because it was a ghost town at the time. Well, there's this young lady sitting on a bench and I was like, hey, what is there to do around here? It looks like a ghost town. She kind of explained to me like a couple things, and I was like, okay, I have some information. I'll act on that, and I'll come back to the movies later on, when it's available for me to watch.
Sure.
Um, but I did do a little bit more walking around because the for some reason the door was open. Maybe it's just for whatever reason, so people could go walk, like they do in the mall on the weekends.
Yeah.
Yeah, or in the morning. And so I kind of did that to see like what stores they had there, just to exploring. I was exploring new territory. And so I come back out and as I'm going back to my condo, I see her walking on the side of the road and I was like, "Hey, do you need a ride or something?" And her response was pretty much, I mean, it was, yeah, I could use a ride. And so she gets into the vehicle. Um, and we start conversations, right? And I was like, it comes to my, it just pops up. I'm like, okay, nobody's around. She was sitting on a bench, and then she's walking this very long distance. You know, I was like, I had to ask her. I was like, where are you coming from? Why are you walking down the street? And she told me some of her personal business, which happens to be the same exact thing that happened, with me, minus I don't know if there was an accusation against that person or not, but she basically was just part of the culture of the time. Just, Jersey Shore came out in 2009 and it kind of sparked this new, like, hookup lifestyle where people,
Hookup culture. Yep.
yeah, hookup culture where people were more, um, they were more willing to talk about it, like just
Talk about
openly,
sex.
like whatever
Mhm.
they did. Yeah. So
And
she
when a
ends up,
person you don't
our
know very
first,
well starts talking about, I just want to say this and kind of
yeah,
contextualize this for the audience.
right.
As a woman myself, who sadly used to be very promiscuous, when a woman does that, she's basically saying, "This is what I'm down for." And so she indicated
Yeah.
immediately that this was the kind of person, and not to say that's bad, because I'm not trying to judge her. I'm just saying that sends a message. Okay.
Right. Yeah. At some point, and it did lead to jokes and us joking
Sure.
about, those types of things uh, during that time period. So she tells me where I need to bring her. I bring her. I go home, and then I'm back. I'm back to work basically, and I go back to work. uh she texted me, many times actually, and my responses were like, hey, I'm really busy, like I cannot, I don't have the time to hang out. And yeah, there were a couple times where I had other plans with people from where I was at. We went exploring, like we drove up a mountain. Yeah, we went to the cool places that you can go and go see in that town. And uh, eventually it got to the point where, like I said, there was nobody around. Um, and uh, it was She texted me at like my at a very interesting time. I'll say that to go out, like for us to go out and do something. And I mean, if she hadn't texted me at that time, we would have never actually like met in person again because I
Mhm.
was just so busy and it just wasn't, you know, it wasn't on my radar, so to speak.
So what you're saying is, at that point, she was offering a friends with benefits kind of situation,
Well,
or
I don't know
was
that to
she?
be true. I don't
Okay.
know that to be
So at this
true.
point, it's still platonic. It's just you guys are hanging out platonically.
Over text messages. We're not hanging out. Like the first time
I
I was just
see.
a
Okay.
drive home. We never hung out at any time whatsoever except for that night and that morning before she
Oh,
left.
okay, I didn't catch that. So you hadn't you
Yeah.
that night was the first time you hung out
Yes.
with her.
Yes.
Okay.
Right.
Okay. All right.
And I wanted to, and just to put this a couple things in context. There's something that I put together I wanted to so people can understand about this before they go diving in to the book or to the to the resources I have on the website to really learn about what's going on and what can happen to you or your family or I mean your anybody you care about is that some of the noteworthy things were that my case is very interesting in the fact that I pled the fifth, right? I exercised my Fifth Amendment right. And so the record of trial is completely one-sided. My attorney did do a good job, but the courts were just not going to favor me whatsoever. It didn't matter how good or bad he did. And I didn't have a real voice. Like I had a voice,
Mhm.
and which will later lead into the debate hearing and why my attorney had to go back and explain, like, hey, well, why are these things so? How did these things end up so terrible? Essentially, is what they were saying. And I mean, he said, I gave him a great defense because y'all had no evidence of wrongdoing, little to no evidence, and I was completely, you know, meeting the standard that would that a case like this would have. And given that you're only seeing one side of it, you really get to see what the government was offering at the time for people, which goes back into the UCI, which we'll get, we'll go back to
We'll get
that. But
into
the
yeah,
use,
we'll get into
yeah,
that, definitely.
because the UCI, I believe, I may be mistaken, but I believe, once this happened to me, it sent me down a rabbit hole for discovery, and so I just did all the research you could possibly do,
Right.
and uh,
Is it okay if I go back to the actual event, or are you comfortable with that? If you're not, that's okay.
um,
Or would you rather
I'm
me just
sorry.
go into it's okay.
Well,
I can also you tell me what you want me to do.
oh, the other part is this: is it, the hard part and of this right here is that you take the entire record of trial and I was there the whole time. I know the whole truth. I was there, and she was there the whole time too, but protected like Fort Knox. And I'm just me with my truth, right? And given that it's a one-sided trial and all of the boundaries that were overstepped, uh,
So
it just shows so much from one perspective, and that's why I knew I had to write the book, is
and the
because
book describes it. The book goes
yeah,
into what happened. For one, you didn't think that you would have to hire an attorney. You thought you had a
no,
good military lawyer that would defend you.
right.
And that's not how things happened. I want to point out for the audience, if because Darin, if you're not comfortable talking about the incident, I just want to say one thing, which is the fact that there was no proof of anything other than a consensual encounter. That's what I got from reading it. Is that a fair assessment?
And that's actually what my appellate attorney realized more recently was that because I never had a voice, I never got to speak, I never got to tell anybody what happened. And whenever he rewrote my pardon letter, he looked back at it and he was like, "That's a sexual contact. Why have we been calling it a sexual assault? Because it was based on consent, right?" And so he actually changed it to say, a sexual contact because I will talk about it. I'll tell you exactly what happened. Like, for the sake of everyone and the future of our service members and veterans, uh, you know, I have enough humility to say, you know what, here's my story. Like, this is what happened, and I'm okay with that.
Okay, so let's go back to it then. So
All right. Well,
she contact. Oh,
before we
okay.
go there, I would like a couple of things before we go down that road. Okay, so I just want to say this, and I know this from experience. There's a legal maxim that says that, and Benjamin Franklin's quoted was saying it one time too, is that it's better than 100 guilty persons should escape than one innocent person should suffer. And it's called Blackstone's ratio. It's a 10-to-1 thing. It's been accepted by the legal community for a very, very long time. That's why you have, like, on on the civilian side, that's why you have things that will say, they don't have the budget for, or they'll say, like, in the interest of justice, we're not going to pursue this because there's not enough. Or they might just drop it like the state did in my case. Um, so it reflects a principle that presumed innocence and protects the individual rights for the justice system. And that's it. And I know from experience, if I had read this and not experienced it, I'd be like, well, that sounds, criminals should go to jail. But then you're like, okay, well, when you're not a criminal and they make you a criminal and you go to jail, that's way worse than anything else you can imagine because it's not true and you're suffering and there's nothing going to take away that suffering from you. And there was no real rationale for it. It was just however this process carried out. And so there's a couple of key quotes that came out of this that help the framework of how to understand what really happened. So we have the legal maxim. They're prosecuting a case that has little to no evidence whatsoever. They offered me a 5-month plea deal, so I would never had to register. I wouldn't have to do anything. They offered me a 5-month plea deal, and I was like, "Who takes a plea deal when they're innocent, like completely innocent?" And so he offers me a plea deal, and I said, "Absolutely not." I looked him dead in his eyes. I said, "Absolutely not." And I said, "Yeah, well, and then we go from there. Obviously, then he's like, "Okay, well." Well, let's get phone records. They won't give phone records. They hit her, she was so protected by all these NDAAs that were coming out from, 2000, mostly 2012 to 2014. That just basically by 2014 you had no rights. And I would find out that that's why I was actually out of the Navy. Like, my EOS was done and I was out of the Navy, and they still, for like a week or so, and then they, shoved me back in, gave me administrative paperwork, kept extending it until the NDAA took effect. And so whoever was that legal that gave me a charge sheet, they knew what they were doing. They were waiting on that. They were like, because a lot of times they'll put, 20 things on a page and hope something sticks. This is a very targeted, very, very targeted charge sheet, and improvable, which goes back to Lieutenant Colonel Palmer's statements where he's telling people, like, put anything on paper, even if it's improvable. If it's not provable, he said, we'll take care of it. And so he had already influenced everybody.
Who was Lieutenant
eh,
Colonel Palmer for the audience who hasn't read the book?
in the JAG Corps, he was the one who taught all the JAGs. He was like their instructor. So essentially, if you talk specifically about him and what was going on for the whole UCI thing, And this is like I said, this is the most robust part of the UCI agenda. Um, it kind of starts off with the Obama administration in 2008, April, immediately, Sexual Assault Awareness Month, with good intent. There's nothing wrong with that. That's what we want. We want, if there's a problem, we want to be able to fix it. 2000, let's see, 2012, the movie that came out that had such an influence.
Invisible War, the Invisible
Yeah,
War.
The Invisible War was basically about, it tied in a little bit of everything. It had a Coast Guard, Marines, Navy, Army, and the Air Force. And, it was kind of weird that the Army and the Air Force, their incidents were from like 96 for the Army and 2003 for the Air Force Academy problem that they had, which seemed like so far removed. But that's why the Navy and the Marine Corps, you know, took the brunt of what was going on. And then it wasn't until like 2019, 2020 that the Army was in the hot seat. And then by 2021, that's whenever, I go up and I do my presentation at the advisory committee.
And
Um,
and I want to, because now we're kind of talking policy, and if it's okay with you, I do want to bring in Keith just for a second because I want
yeah.
to talk about where this was systemic. And so Keith, did you know as you were going through your case that this was a systemic issue, or did you think that this was an isolated case with you?
At the time I was accused, I had no idea that it was systemic. Once you start pulling the string and you realize what was going on, as he mentioned, the documentary and the complete denial of all due diligence, you start hearing of other cases and other courts, other judges, that it didn't matter. The facts of the case didn't matter. Truth was a terrible defense, and you're guilty until proven innocent if you were in that time frame.
Right. And I think that that's
And you
that's
can't prove innocence. That's the big thing, is that they bring you to court martial, they get you past court martial so that the burden shifts. Once the burden shifts, it's you're not coming back. I mean, it takes $500,000, I know of some people that spent $500,000 to fight their case, some less, 100,000, 200,000. But most people who tried to just fight their case without outside influence, they didn't have a chance. We
right.
didn't have a chance. I didn't have a chance. Which brings me back to the framework I was talking about, is that there's some key quotes that I want to talk about, and this is to the convening authority. So I had already been. So my trial lasted half a day. These cases go on for weeks. My trial lasted half a day, not even a full work day, and I was sentenced by the next afternoon. No coverage, no anything. But so at that point, then I'm like, okay, I understand this. I need oversight. I need somebody from the outside. And so the only person that I knew from home, was an attorney named Carl Parker. He was a senator during the JFK era, and he had 60 years of legal experience. And he wrote a letter to the convening authority on my behalf, calling out all of the things that were wrong for, and this was during the dispute where they were trying to take the ability from the convening authority away, which had been instilled in like the 60s and the 80s, like there were or 70s and 80s. And so finally, eventually they started attacking that, saying like, we don't need that no more. Convening authorities don't need it. They don't need to have that power. And so the convening authorities were more inclined to just rubber stamp things, send them through. because then they were going
Right.
to go to court. Right.
So, and I want to clarify that, because my understanding, and you can tell me if I'm wrong, was that as a convening authority, you had to show that you were tough on sexual assault. And
Right.
if you didn't send every case to court martial, even if it lacked evidence, then you risked being called out by either your higher headquarters or by Congress. And that was one of the reasons why many convening authorities, even when cases lacked sufficient evidence, went automatically to court martial. Is that correct, Darin?
That's correct, and I'll tell you why. Because here is the famous words from the briefing where all JAGs got all their information from. Um, I call it a prescription because I see it for what it is, and I do have, I have I describe them as lenses. I have these broad lenses that see. They call them polymaths, like when you're like multidisciplinary across the board and you can, put things together. So it's a polymathic type thing. And so I read it like a script, I read it like a prescription. So this is what he says. This is the judge advocate, Lieutenant Colonel Palmer says, you must have a willing suspension of disbelief of the victim once the convening authority has decided to proceed with the charges. I don't really know where he was going with that, but here's the important ones. He says straight up, the defendant is guilty. We wouldn't be at this stage if he wasn't guilty. But the NDAA forced the judge's hands at Article 32, and I believe that was either 2012 or 2013, where they had no choice but to push into, regardless of if there was evidence or not. At Article 32, they'd have a hearing, and I have documentation that says that my Article 32 judge, who was a female, and she actually explicitly says on there, even though there's a lot here that does, that would, we essentially saying they're not inclined to think that anything happened, it has to go forward. I mean,
Right.
essentially in a nutshell.
And the state declined to prosecute your case. I think that's
Right.
also something that needs to be brought out here, is that
And that was their biggest ask. That was their biggest ask. Take it away from the chain of command. So the first thing they did was took it, and this is before they even actually started taking it away from the chain of command. They took it away from the chain of command and brought it to the state. The state investigated me. I had no idea. No, I didn't know I was under investigation for years until I got an actual charge sheet. Um, and my command was like, "Hey, we don't know what this is all about." Like I had no idea I was under investigation for all those years. Um, I'm sorry. There's
are
just
you
so much
yeah, I know.
information.
Are you
There's so much
comfortable
information.
going back to the night? Because I think that's really important. But if you're not, just tell me and we'll move right
Yeah.
past it. So you tell me what you want to do.
Okay. So yeah. Well. Okay. So we can touch on this when we get to court martial, but just let me
Right.
finish just saying it real quick. So
Okay.
he says defendant's guilty. As a trial counsel, your job is to prove the defendant's guilty with the fullest veracity. Don't hold back. Once convicted, we need to crush these. Well, he said Marines at the time and get them out. And then he called all defendants scumbags. Like, so if you're defending yourself, so one, you're automatically getting pushed forward. We call it being pushed to the rear. You get pushed to the rear, and then you're a scumbag because they had no choice but to push you forward. So you're in a trap. Essentially, that's a trap. And let's see yeah. So so this is what he told him about the charge sheet, and that's why my charge sheet is so important. Court documentation said the JAG also stated that trial counsel needs to list any charges on the charge sheet just to get the charges before members. That's all he wanted. He wanted stuff on papers to get charges before members, even if the elements of the charges cannot be proven. He said that even if they cannot be
crazy.
proven, why
It's
would you
absolutely
do that?
insane.
Like, just ask yourself why.
Because they were under pressure. They were under the gun to get
Under
to be
pressure.
because and this
And
is
that's
where
leadership. That's
it's
leadership.
so sad, because there were legitimate cases that were swept under the rug. And
Right.
so instead of using a root cause analysis and saying, okay, well, we need to work on due process, we need to work
Yeah.
on the rules of evidence, we need to take an ethical approach. Instead, let's overswing to the other side. I mean, that's what I
Yeah.
see has happened here.
Yeah.
And now we have people to this day who don't have the benefits and the rights restored. We have people to this day, as Arvis Owen said in our last podcast about this issue that you can find on my false accusations page on the Teresa's Tapestries website. We have people to this day that are still in the brig because of
Yeah.
this issue. And that's what
Absolutely.
really breaks my heart. And
Yeah. We need to get them out of there by any means possible.
and this is where I do believe that the DoD needs to address this issue, and not just address it going forward. That's great. We
Absolutely.
want to address it going forward. It's positive
Absolutely.
sign to see the Army have some guidance put out. I saw that. That's not UCMJ reform, but okay. And I get it that all the TJAGs are not confirmed yet. There's a lot of things this
Yeah.
administration has to do sequentially, but it doesn't excuse what has happened here. It
Not
doesn't
at all.
excuse the fact, and I'm going to get mad for a second because this pisses me off. This doesn't freaking excuse the exposés that we need to have CBS have. I don't care that they're left leaning. Doesn't excuse the expose that I want to see Fox News have. Like, where
Right.
are they in all this? And where's Megyn Kelly? Where's Candace Owen? Where's Sean Ryan? Where are all these people when this issue needs to be talked about? And that's what I want to see happen.
Well,
I
they were
want to see
being
people
censored.
talking.
They were being censored, and free speech was a myth at the time, and a lot of people didn't know that. And we've reached that era where now you can speak openly. And there's a platform, just like I said, X. You can go to
Right.
that one, and there's nobody going to tell you what you can and can't say on there.
Well, I want to
And
bring Keith back in here for a second, though, too, because I want to know. I mean, Keith's a Navy SEAL, and there had to have been so much publicity around his case because of the fact that he's a Navy SEAL, and Navy SEALs get a lot more publicity than the rest of us, rightly so. So tell me a little bit about when your case was going on. Did you sense that the mainstream media was inclined to take it on and talk about it?
So Teresa, as you said, yeah, being a SEAL is a double-edged. There's two sides to that coin, obviously, and I don't think that helped me at all. In fact, I became the feather in the cap for the military to say that, look at, we're going to prosecute everybody. And they just left. Now, whether or not there's actually valid any validity to the accusations, that's regardless. We're just going to prosecute everyone and convict everyone. What was your last question? I'm sorry.
Well, I'm just, yeah, I mean, that was kind of what I was saying, is that did you sense that these days we have podcasts. Back then, I don't think when you were convicted, these kinds of shows were not as prolific. Like, it wasn't just like everybody had military people had podcasts like myself, even smaller shows like mine. But my question is, where's the investigative journalism? Where's the 2020s? Where's the Dateline? Where is the Politico? I'm just trying to think of, I don't care if they're left, again, I don't care if they're right. It doesn't matter to me. But where are those shows that would really dig into this issue and say, is this systemic? What has happened? I mean, even to this day, like, why am I and I'm not the only one, Tell It Like It Is does it too, and a couple other really small military podcasters are taking this on, and Andy Stump took yours on a few years back, and I think you had a few other shows that you did. So I definitely want to give credit where credit's due. But why isn't there a bigger outcry over this?
I think that's a question we've all been asking, and I don't have the answer to that. I will say it's absolutely necessary. I'm not going to make accusations. I didn't like it when it was done to me, so I'm not going to accuse others of why they're not doing it
Sure.
or what they're
That's fair.
lacking. Um, however, I want to echo your point about not having justice on either side. Some of my greatest supporters have been true victims of sexual assault. Most of my supporters have been women. Now, whether that's because men are fearful of speaking out loud on the subject,
Mhm.
and women get angry, just and because if they've actually been true victims of sexual assault themselves, they can see the writing on the walls and they know exactly what's going on. So I know you've spoken of some people, um, and I'd be more than willing to happy to work with them, and we'll do it. If nobody else is doing it, then
We do
then
it.
it's
Yeah.
then we do it.
And they're wonderful broadcasters. I mean, I'm a huge fan of Sean Ryan. I'm a huge fan of Joe Rogan. I'm a huge fan of Megyn Kelly. I'm a huge fan of Candace Owen. I just hope that somebody shows them this podcast or shows them another podcast that one of you guys have done, because I really want to see that. And I can think of nothing better for them to take on, because this is an issue that is impacting the people who stand up to fight and die and bleed for our country. And now we're going to hold them accountable in a kangaroo court where they're not given the rights to fully investigate the issue. And that's where, Darin, I really want to circle back now to going into your case, because I really want people to see what happened. I know it's in the book, and again, if you can summarize it, that's great. If you aren't comfortable talking about it, and let me just say and caveat this is an incredibly hard thing for people to talk about. Talking about this live, even, but it's what needs
Yeah.
to be done, because I don't know where else these conversations are happening. And
Right.
so I'm going to go back to you. You tell me what you can, and we'll go from there.
All right.
I got off track just a little bit. Like I said, this topic, it's a traumatic stress thing. You get stuck in the moments, and so um, if I could just finish, there's a couple key quotes from highly influential people that I wanted to read before we get to that part. And so I just want to say, he said, so this is from the senator, former JAG, lawyer, 60 years. I'm frankly surprised, having 55 years of legal experience at the time and trying hundreds, if not thousands, of criminal matters, that the result of a conviction and sentence came about. That was from at the end of his arguments to the convening authority. In a letter to POTUS from Mr. Casera, Mr. Darin Lopez was wrongly convicted of sexual assault while serving in the United States Navy. This case is one in a troubling trend of service members convicted of sexual assaults based on evidence that would never have led to a conviction in any other forum. Mr. Lopez is innocent. And then that's when he was later realized it was a sexual contact and not sexual assault. That would happen, not good or bad, but just the occurrence of what happened. It was more of a sexual contact than than sex or sexual assault. And then in a communication to me, I have lead trial counselors from Washington Yard quote, I fully believe the politics of the time had a major impact on your case and many others at the time. And I even went into asking him questions. I said, are there hundreds? He said, yes. I said, are there many hundreds? He said, yes. I said, what about 1,000? He said, yes. I said, what about a couple thousand? He said, that's where I would start getting, I would start, pulling chalks on it, so to speak, because I mean, if looking from their perspective, think about it, if there's a couple thousand that they have to go back and review, they're not going to do it. And, you know, he was the lead trial counsel, lead prosecutor, and at the
And that's
Navy
what shocks
Yard.
me, Darin, is that
Yeah,
there's people, I mean, thank God for Admiral Lorge, retired,
yeah,
who did this amazing uh, a- affidavit, which like I said, I have on my website if anybody wants to
right,
go and read it. And I think this is just the part that really just gets me is right here. I perceived, number 7, I perceived that if I were to disapprove the findings in this case, it would adversely affect the Navy. Everyone from the president down the chain in Congress would fail to look at its merit and only view it from the prism of opinion. Even though I was convinced then and am convinced now that I should have disapproved the findings, my consideration of the Navy's interest in avoiding the perception that military leaders were sweeping sexual assaults under the rug outweighed that conviction at this time. And it's just shocking. And then number 12, on a personal note, I would ask you to forgive my failure in leadership and right the wrong that I committed in this case against Senior Chief Barry. Ensure justice prevails, and when doubt exists, allow a man to remain innocent.
right.
And that just
And so
tells you.
here's yeah, it tells you. But here's the biggest part. In 2021, I took a giant leap of faith. It was by pure happenstance. And I told you I'm a religious person, and I believe God's hand is all in this. And I'll always say that He is the number one that has brought me this far, because I wouldn't be here without putting my trust in Him. And so you take that information that we just spoke about, and you fast forward to 2023, where they have they enable the Independent Office of Special Trial Counsel to reduce UCI in sexual assault cases. That's what it was created for, to take UCI out of it. So I discovered the problem was UCI. So in 2023, they enact something, a whole orchestration. It takes budgets. You know how these things go, at the upper echelons. There's tons of meetings, there's tons of logistics, there's tons of everything. But the fact in 2023 that they actually listened to what we were saying and created it is that's it right there. They admit it. That's their admission of guilt. And now they really need to go back and fix it, because it was prevalent enough to warrant a systemic reform. So we had a systemic problem, and now in 2023 we have systemic reform. So, the UCI case, read she's gonna tag, I believe you posted the most robust version of the UCI chain from 2006 all the way to 2025.
Yep,
Yeah,
it'll be in the
and
show notes right after the show. Yep.
yeah, and so you're gonna see the writing on the wall. And it was all done in such a way, like I said, they shaped the environment. They made people believe things. General Amos went around giving these heritage, these briefings about, hey, if you do this, you do this, you do this, because the Marines were on the hot seat. Well, if you're in the Navy, and my accuser was a Marine, I didn't have a chance. I didn't have a chance at all, especially with the NDAAs and everything that came past that. And it just solidifies my plight. It solidifies all the people who did claim UCI and received um, their justice, but there's still so many people that don't, like you said, don't have justice, are still sitting behind bars. I mean, just like I said, I turned down 5 months to face life because I wasn't having it. I mean, that speaks for itself. Like, nobody takes this much time and years out of their life to put a case study together and put all these things together unless you are damaged severely and you want to leave no stone unturned until you figure out what exactly happened.
That's why
And
I was
so,
so convinced of your innocence, Darin. After I read your book, and I did have a lot of questions because this was just the part that was really hard for me to understand is how someone could get convinced that something happened. And then after I started to understand this issue a little bit better with false accusations, I understood that there's really three camps of people. And I'll just say this, and like I said, this isn't specific to you. There are the people who knowingly lie because they can benefit from it, unfortunately, because there are MST claims. There
Right.
are sometimes people who are in custody battles who
Right.
are getting a favorable advantage by doing this. There are people who are getting paid by some power that be to make these claims.
And
Then
that
there's
was
the
the
number.
worst part. That was the worst part.
Absolutely. And I've heard those cases. And then there's the number two one where somebody doesn't remember what happened
Yeah.
or somebody was
Oh, the
passed out.
strategic I don't knows. So whenever this, so if you follow the NDAAs, another thing that you'll realize, and I want everybody to go back and look at their case and see, that's one of the biggest things. The message, this is all about the message. This is not about me. I don't have the best thing I have is the chance at a pardon, and the chance of me getting a pardon, it's one in a million. But so I'm here for you and to tell everybody about these resources because it will get you to where you need to be. If all you have to do is read my resources and you will start putting the pieces together and you'll understand how what happened to you happened to you. And then from there, you'll have more peace and you can move forward and you can move forward even more and you can bring it to whoever it may be. The advisory committee has unfortunately been shut down as of now. And so you
Yes,
don't
there was
have,
a defense advisory committee that was meeting at the Pentagon and was
yep,
going over these issues. And it
yep,
was on both sides. Just from my understanding, it was people who had been victims of false accusations, and then there were people who didn't feel that they received justice and they were victims. And so
right.
they
And I
were
was
listening to these
yeah,
cases. Go ahead.
yeah. Well, they were listening to the cases, and I overheard um, somebody speaking about it one day, and I reached out and I said, "Hey, these are only," and I kind of looked and investigated a little bit. I said, "These are only accusers or the people who were victims of an assault or an alleged assault. I don't know." But they were going and they were, fueling the fire. And I was like, well, why? I'm a victim too. I went through every single possible course of action to get it fixed. And all I got was nothing in return. So, like, when you read my record of trial, it's not going to make any sense. When you read any of the appellate briefs, it's not going to make any sense. And whenever you get to the CAF denied my review because we submitted phone records and evidence to show, like, to support, hey, this person was actively like doing things, like they were calling me at the same time where they're saying they don't remember anything, and they wouldn't accept it. And the rationale was he says he has these things, but he didn't submit them. We absolutely submitted them. So that the CAF just shot me down because they were probably you're overwhelmed. They were swamped. When I went in 2021 to speak at the advisory committee, that's essentially what they were talking about. Was them at one point they were overwhelmed, and then now they have time to do more, and that's why they were able to get the integrity unit developed, so that and manning and stuff like that, so they had enough people to do it because they had. If you look back for recruiting, the JAG Corps got super bumped up in the years where me and Keith were tried, and me and Keith, I'll say this: me and Keith were tried in the worst possible years, in the first worst possible time frame ever. You had the highest, very large command cases. You had there's just so many things to list that, like I said, the website and the book will tell you it all. But um
Well, like I
oh
said,
man,
I
see,
know this is so
I'm
hard,
sorry.
and
Yeah,
what I want us to do is I want this to be a productive
okay,
conversation, and I know
right, yeah,
how incredibly hard this is to share.
yeah.
Um, we don't have to go back to the story of what happened.
Now let's
It's in
go
your
back
book.
to
Are you
we can
sure?
we can yeah, let's do it.
Okay,
Let's do it.
let's do it. Okay, so I'm going to go back. There was an evening that
Yep.
you met this person, the accuser, at a bar. Is that correct?
No, actually, what happened was that she invited me out
Right.
to a. She said that she wanted to meet me at some club or something like that, and I said, "Well, what kind of place is it?" And she said it's a strip club, and I was like, "Well, that's not really my thing." And she was like, "Well, there's another place that a lot of people go." And I said, "Well, what is that like?" She's like, "It's more of like a dance place, dance hall type thing." I was like, "That's my style. Let's go there." And so she calls me to come pick her up. So I go pick her up from where I dropped her off that one when we met, and I bring her and drive her to the place. So I don't know where that's. See, this is the difficulty. You're gonna read the record of the trial, and I can tell you the story of what actually happened, and they don't really mesh very well. And it doesn't make sense. The base has cameras. They saw me come in and pick her up. They didn't anything that would benefit me was destroyed. Anything, any camera evidence, phone records. She magically lost her phone whenever it was questioned, like, "Hey, can I see your phone records?" It just magically just disappears, breaks or something, like, or dropped and broken and destroyed. Um, there was just everything that would benefit me was completely just thrown out. And the first thing you do in any investigation is phone records. I mean, that's literally like just to give some veracity to a claim, like, okay, let's see your phone records. All right, oh, here you go. You show me phone records. That's step number one, and that
Right.
never happened. I actually was not able to get my phone records because a judge wouldn't. Judge has to ask for them and request for them. He has to, give a subpoena, and I was able to get mine because while I was in the brig, my account went into default and was turned over to third-party collections. Third-party collections, fortunately, had my entire phone record, so I could see her calling me. I could see exactly when she called me at what time. I could see her transitioning from phone towers, like from leaving where we were at while we were there to going somewhere, I don't know where, and then coming back. And none of these things were discussed because, like I said, the lieutenant who was representing me, all of these were valid points, but he thought he had it beat. I mean, he literally
Mm.
had her impeached at one point, and she's the
He
only
did.
witness. And the judge is like, nah, nah.
Yeah. In the record of trial, I felt like he did a great job
Yeah, he
of
did.
disproving her
Right,
allegations by showing things that you should remember, like
right.
not being able to remember where you went the next morning, the errands that you ran that day, that next morning with the cab driver, just things like that.
Yeah, you go from standing there. This is the story. You go from standing there and whatever that means. No, I still don't know. Um, to her running back and forth, trying to get me to stay with her friend at the motel next door. I said, "No, I have a villa. I'm going home." And yeah, I guess maybe in her head, I can't. I'm not going to assume anything. But if it was anybody else, they'd be like, "Ooh, villa. Hey, do you have, can I come stay with you?" And I was, at the time, I was like, "Sure, why not?" I told her, I said, "I have an extra bed." And this is all if you go back through the regular trial and you find the investigator notes and stuff, this is why that bed was messed up. Like they could tell that the sheets and stuff were all like messed up or whatever. Because I assume originally she went in there and was gonna go to sleep, but then she comes into my room. So, there's two rooms, uh, and that's what happened while we were there, and that's what and led into the engagement of, something happening, her coming from the other room and coming into my room.
Right.
But going back, she said she was staying there. We don't know what that means. She's going back and forth talking to her friend, and we end up at a point where I'm like, "Hey, I'm going home. I'm tired. Like I've been dancing my butt off. Like I didn't see her. I saw her for sometime, but I'm a social. I used to be. Hey, I used to be handsome, and I used to be a social butterfly. And the thing is that you know I danced around that place until I was just ready for bed. Like I was just exhausted, and I had a good time. And like I said, I told her, I said I do have another place. I said I'm not staying at this motel, whatever this is. I got something better than this. I'm not going over there. And so we get back, and I'm in the Jeep Wrangler, right? So she's jumping out in and out of my Jeep Wrangler. She's texting people on her phone, and so and the whole time the prosecution is saying that she's incapacitated at this time, like that she doesn't remember because she's incapacitated. That's what the prosecution's saying. And I mean, it leans more towards a memory blackout, which is pretty common. Uh, like actually, I just there's just one person I used to work with that had a rare disease that didn't know that every time they consumed any alcohol, they actually blacked out. Even like just a sip, they had a disease though,
And,
but
and
that
that's
wasn't the case.
that's yeah, and I mean that is one of the problems with alcohol
Yeah,
is
yeah,
that it does on both sides. It makes it
right,
hard for people to definitively say what happened.
yeah. And then
So,
so and then so
go ahead.
getting back to the story where um I'm assuming she was just like she had something on her mind, and so she came in. She comes at me, we're kind of just laying there just at first, and then one thing leads to another. I get up out of bed, I go get protection, and I'm trying to put it on, and I have either adrenal fatigue or I was just exhausted. I don't know. I mean, the place where I was at will wear you out, especially it's sink or swim, and so I was already exhausted from that, but then I was exhausted from dancing for probably about 3 or 4 hours straight, just
Sure.
around the place. Not to make light of it, but that's me and my character. Like I've always been like that, and I've never had a problem with it before. Um, so it's a fail. So that becomes a failure, so much so that that's why the two condoms were found. Uh, that we tried twice, it didn't happen. But if you actually look back into the record, into the evidence, there's a photo and there's actually three condoms because of the next morning. So we wake up, and I wake up, and then I don't know what she had been doing, but it looked like she had already been up doing something, like in the bathroom. And she comes back, and I noticed like she's kind of wet, and I was like, hey, I was like, what is that? She was like, "Oh, I'm gonna I'm taking a shower." And I said, "Oh, okay." So I wake up and I go into the living room and I sit on the couch and I turn TV on, get on, phone, flip through whatever kind of Facebook or something that's going on. And she comes out and she says, "Hey, will you wash and dry my dress for me while I take a shower and get ready and stuff?" And I said, "Okay." I said, "Hey, I already called a cab for you." Because she had a pre scheduled medical appointment, and she said she had to be there. And I said, okay. I was like, I'll get you there. So I called the cab, I paid for it. She comes out, so I didn't see anything wrong with the dress. Like I looked at it, and not to give away her too much information, but that was all she was wearing. Um, and so I didn't wash it. I just dried it because it just looked like it was wet. I mean, so I threw it in the dryer. By the time she gets out, she comes out in a towel and she sits by me, and uh, I'm just sitting there watching TV, and we weren't really talking much, but she just kind of like we were kind of leaning on each other, and then she just kind of drops her towel, and one thing leads to another. We kind of foreplay again, and I'm still having performance issues. I get up, I go get protection again, and I'm trying, uh, but it's just not happening. And in hindsight, like I said, it could have been adrenal fatigue. It could have been just that I was just so exhausted
You're
from
just
the night
exhausted. Yeah.
before. I
Yep.
was exhausted. I mean, and mentally, for sure. I mean, you're among the best of the best whenever you are where I was at, and so um, there's a high standard and a high bar, uh, you know,
Yeah.
competitively speaking. Like you have to be on Harvard and Brown and Columbia's level, and I'm just a guy that went to, whatever college was available to me wherever I was at, so it was a challenge, but also I did very, very well, by the way. They actually recommended me for all the next things, but I
Yeah,
did
you
go
were
to
on the
some of
promotion
them.
track. That's what
Yeah, I was
also
on a
is a
very
really
yeah,
important part of this story is that you were on
yeah,
this track to keep going and go very
right,
far in the Navy. And that's where the shame
absolutely.
in this is in my book is that they lost a one hell of a terrific warfighter when this happened. I feel the same way about Keith, about so many of the people who this has
Yeah.
happened to. So next morning, nothing happens, and you call her a cab because
Well, the
she's
cab had
leaving.
been
Oh,
called, yeah, and so we try again. It doesn't work out. My phone goes off, and I'm like, oh, I need to take that call, and I check it, and it's the cab driver, and I said, oh, that's the cab, and she's like, oh, we're in a rush, so she runs back into the bathroom, does whatever she needs to do in there. I go up to the front door, and I'm like, hey, she'll be out in a second. I don't know if it's going to be, no offense. I don't know how long it takes women to get ready, and I've been dating
sure.
women my whole life, so I didn't know what to expect. So I just had a minute just to keep the cabbie there because I was paying for it, and I had to not. I didn't want to. Once again, I had bills to pay. I wasn't trying to let the meter run, and so everything seemed okay until this very weird. So she's walking to the front door. She's walking to the front door, and I'm helping her grab her things out, walk her on her way, and then I sit on the couch instead of bringing her to the door because she was on her, it looked like she was just on her own, like trying to hurry up and get out. And she opens the door, stops, and then she shuts the door back, and she said, "Are we gonna see each other again?" I said, "I leave in like a week or two." I said, "Most likely not." And there was kind of like an expression, but it didn't I didn't really know how to take it at the time. I didn't know if it was positive, negative, or what. I just didn't really know what the expression meant. And then she goes out the door, and that's the last I know of her. I don't know anything that happened, but according to the record of trial, she gets out, goes into the taxi. For some reason, the taxi driver says she looks like she's upset. Plausible. It's possible. I don't know what for. It could have been my non-performance, just because I was embarrassed. I was extremely embarrassed, and I'm very embarrassed to say this in front of this crowd. But the truth has to be told. You have to tell your truth. You have to speak your truth to get to a point where you're so humble that there's no way for them to come back at you. You have to give them complete transparency. And
I
that's
agree.
why I wrote the book, and that's why I'm talking about this. You know, no guy wants to talk about his shortcomings, but I mean, even in the beginning, when they're talking about a sex life, nobody wants to talk about their sex life,
That's what I said
you
to
know?
Arvis that day. I said, I just can't fathom how this happens, but then I can in terms of like men are just trained to not talk about feelings, to not talk about any kind of failures or shortcomings or vulnerabilities. And
Right.
so these kinds of issues really do live in silence because nobody's
Yeah.
willing to talk about them. And that's one of the reasons I took it up was because I
Right.
just
And
didn't
thank
see
you.
that there were places where men could talk about this. And this
Yeah.
does happen and this is such a private matter. And to think that
Yeah. And
so
nobody
yeah, go
wants,
ahead.
no, yeah, nobody wants to talk about their exploits or, their intimacies or anything, of that nature. And, so allegedly what happens after that is that cab driver says she looked upset. She was like, "Well, why did she look upset?" Well, she had like eye stuff running in her eye. Well, she just got out of the shower and had no purse or anything with her. And I mean, I would assume that's just like eye makeup, you know. I mean, I kind of noticed a little bit that it was kind of messed up when she was, you know, walking out, but I didn't say that. I wasn't going to be like, you know, insulting somebody before they leave my place. But so she asked the girl if she wants to go to the police station, and she's like, "Well, why do you, you know, why did that question come up?" That is the thing. Like, why does this cab driver become so invested in something that wasn't anything? And so that was a big question that I still have to this day. Like, why was this cab driver so invested in doing what she did? And so, and then this whole time, she's saying the person, the accuser, the person is saying that she doesn't remember anything from the night before, and she also doesn't remember the morning. And
Right.
she doesn't remember going with the taxi driver. The taxi driver gives this long story about how they left there, went to a gas station, bought cigarettes and sodas, and they're hanging out for a couple hours and they're doing stuff. And she allegedly got this appointment that she goes to, but she doesn't remember any of that. She only remembers once she gets to the doctor. And then she tells the doctor that she's not feeling well and will you run some tests? So they run, fortunately for me, which in a regular justice system, this would have like solidified
Yeah.
it.
Oh yeah.
um they run all the tests. You know,
Hmm.
the prosecution makes up a story about scratches, about bite marks and stuff. You can ask any woman I've ever been encountered with my entire life. I have not once ever bit anybody, not one time, period. Never has happened. But allegedly she's got all these bite marks on her, which she doesn't show to medical, but she testifies and says that she had bite marks on her and stuff like, and all these scratches and all this stuff, which nobody sees ever. But it's in the record of trial as truth, but nobody ever sees it. So they do a drug panel, they do all this stuff, run a full tox, everything. No alcohol at that point in her system. I mean, she said she, you know, we'll get back to that. 3 drinks of alcohol in 4 to 5 hours. There's barely any in your body. I mean, we were dancing and stuff. You know, it was there was no alcohol. It was not as big of a deal as anybody. She could have drove my Jeep around and not got in trouble if she got pulled over. I mean, that's the truth of the matter. And you know, then you have the toxicology, absolutely nothing in her whatsoever. So then that's whenever they have to like shift gears and pivot and say, okay, well, where, how do we, how do we get a conviction now? And you know, then that's when they move on to just doing the prescription, like the prescription. You know, I went judge alone. The judge could have said whatever he wanted to, and it was going to stick.
And you thought by having a judge that it would be more legit. You thought maybe,
Right.
okay, this person knows the law. And can I also ask why you chose not to testify?
The testifying was, my attorney was very well aware of all of the stuff that was going on with UCI. I understood it from a perspective because I was very involved, and actually we developed a course on building, you know, psychological operations into the Navy, information operations, and shaping battle environments and stuff like that. You know, I was a one of one guy. Um, and so my lenses were, you know, I have these very special lenses that can see things that other people don't notice, so to speak. Um, so I'm sorry, here goes that
No, no, it's okay.
refract.
It's okay. So I'm going to go back to why you just chose not to testify.
Okay, so we talked about, so I wasn't testifying from the beginning, and he was like, "Hey, I'm thinking about putting you on the stand," and I said, "You
Because
know,
I
why
just think
would we?"
you would have come across so credible.
I don't, you know, it was one of those things where I knew my rights and I knew what was going on, but I knew that I was innocent, and I knew that there was no amount of evidence that they could ever produce that could find me guilty.
You were just so sure. You were so
I was
sure.
positive.
And
My
again, as I
yeah,
read the transcript, your lawyer put on a great defense. Like
right.
I
He said
did
I
there
would be
wasn't
home the
anything
next day. He
there
said,
wasn't
"Hey,
anything
man,"
I saw in that
right,
I would have done differently as I was reading it.
right. But
So
yet they still made him do a debate hearing and explain himself and say, "Hey, there was no evidence against this man. Somebody, and he's not going to call people out, but like Arva said, arbitrary decision making when you go judge alone." And this is exactly what he told me. He said, the prescription from Lieutenant Colonel Palmer was get him on a, the panels are knuckle draggers, you know, implying, hey, ensure they don't have a panel because the panel can get them out of it. So he's demeaning having people have a panel, and so when you go judge alone, he basically took me on the UCI track. Like I said, if you follow each individual step that he made, now his performance was, like I said, I have no issue with performance, but the things that happened along the way reeked of UCI so much that I was at a medical appointment. So I found out I didn't know I was being investigated. I did get a phone call, and there was this one thing that the instructors put out that when we were in this area. They said, "Hey, there's a woman scorned here. She's married and she goes out and she sleeps with everybody she can to make her husband mad because they're not divorced and so and so." And so I get this random phone call, and I think I'm like testing the waters because this is where it gets very tricky for me. I'm under NDAs and all this other stuff, and I don't know whenever real life intervenes with what's going on, what I'm supposed to be doing. And so I was under the impression that that was the husband, and he was trying to find out if I was the guy that she's,
that's right.
attempted to sleep with. And so I'm like, "Hey man, look, I'm not answering any questions about this. I do know who you're talking about, but
Right.
you need to ask her the hard questions."
Right.
And come to find out, it was a detective. And in our world, hey, detective so and so, that's this, that, everybody has credentials. It's just another person, it's another person calling you. You don't look at it
You don't just
from,
give away everything. Yeah, no, I've had people call me and say I had
right,
a FBI call me just about 8 months ago and tell me that there was a picture of me sent to somebody, getting my head chopped off by the Taliban and asking me if I was legit and if I was okay. And they said they were from the FBI, and then someone else called me and said they were from NCIS, and I didn't believe a word of it. I thought it was
right.
somebody who bugged my phone, and I was on
Yeah,
Keesler, and I wouldn't leave the base until I called my
yeah.
JAG at work and verified that no shit, this really was it was a romance scam. It was like some old guy
Um,
that got like an image and was being told if he didn't send money to this person, I was going to get hurt because I'd been kidnapped. But point being
oh
is that,
yeah.
yeah, I don't believe crap when people call me and what they
No,
say.
no.
So you were smart
Yeah.
not to say anything because you don't know who they are and what their agenda is.
Yeah,
So
and that's why I don't know if there's what's going on, and that's why I didn't think there was an investigation going on until
right,
it's dropped. I get a letter in the mail and says, "Hey, your investigation has been dropped due to lack of evidence." And he actually left a note in there, which kind of was interesting because he said, for some reason, the Navy has an invested interest in this case. And that came after they dismissed it. I mean, and that's literally saying UCI. That's saying they're coming after me. Even though the state has a right of first refusal, he's like, the Navy is gonna pick this up and they're
not going to
gonna
let it
handle
go.
it and they're not gonna let it go, essentially. Yeah. And
Wow.
so there was a lot of stuff going on at the time. In the court martial, the guy said, my my attorney asked her, he said, "Did you tell anybody uh to make this accusation?" She said no. She said that he asked her straight, direct question. "Well, then why are we here?" She says, "I don't know." So she doesn't even know why we're in the courtroom. But she was, and this is just professional, knowing uh just things. Um that SAPR program that came out, you could tell the difference between somebody who was initially a victim or an alleged victim, and then when they had their SAFR attorney coaching them, there was a big difference. And I read tons and tons of case files while I was in the brig, and I could tell you the exact moment when the SAFR started doing the writing for them, and all they had to do was remember it. And that's why there's so many inconsistencies in her testifying. Like at first she says she called the cab. Well, that's absolutely not true. The cab, that's the one thing the cab driver couldn't deny because it's on the phone record, Um, all of the things that there's not one thing that they can just there's not one element that they can dispute or bring up that can't be disputed at this point in time, now that people are more knowledgeable of all the things that were going on at that time, the why, the how, the who. Once you figure those things out, it makes all of the sense. But there is no avenue at this time, and that's why I go to DACAPAD and I say, hey, I'm a victim, but I'm a different type of victim than y'all have ever seen. I have exhausted all things, and I have no avenue for recourse or relief. And that's what I'm here for, to promote this thing I call the Fair Act. I read it, and it was actually originated in British law, but it's called a falsely accused individual review, case by case basis. Makes sense. If somebody believes that they were falsely accused, present that. And whenever they present that, look at it and the only real way for it to be fair is to look at it before the burden flip, not in the appellate process, not in the convening authorities, wheelhouse, but as it's in trial. You have to look at it like you're the judge for that trial, looking at all the facts and evidence presented and see if you can still say, yeah, without a doubt, this person's guilty or innocent. And that's the only way that the people like me who were left behind are going to have a chance. Period. There is nothing else. A
I agree.
pardon is an admission of guilt. People who are not guilty, a pardon would be relief and it would help life, but it's still wrong because if you're truly innocent, it does hurt it stings a lot. And I just really, at the end of the day, there's so many. I mean, we could go on for hours and hours about this stuff, but I want to stay on track with you on where we were at. So, um, can you refresh me
Yeah,
on the last
absolutely.
parts?
And I think that we're in a good place to kind of bring Keith back on here and say, and I just want to ask you, Keith, as you're listening to the story, does this sound familiar with what you experienced or with what you've heard from other people who've experienced something similar?
Oh, it's very familiar. I won't go into it at this because, as he said, we'll be here another hour. But much of what he has just talked about, I'm just nodding my head, just remembering, and it's the cases are very similar. When the actions were, when it's by design, it makes sense that this is all going to sound the same.
Right.
So if you
Right.
bring back, God, I would say conservatively, probably when I was in the brig, 40% did not deserve to be there, myself included. As he had mentioned, the state, the law enforcement agencies, local law enforcement agencies, the city, the state. Nobody was going to prosecute. Nobody was going to take my case to trial. Nobody was going to entertain it. But once my accuser brought that to NCIS, without any evidence, there still was no evidence. There never was. It was her accusation. NCIS investigated me for 18 months, as they should. And during my trial, they were never called to testify during my court martial because there was nothing to testify to. I was convicted after 20 years in the military. I had a top secret clearance at the time. The government knew what I was doing everywhere I went. The government knew what I was doing. I was reinvestigated for that clearance every 5 years. And a woman who they'd never known, who makes an accusation, that's all they needed for my conviction. I also did not have a jury. I went with judge alone. I also never took the stand. I requested it several times to my attorneys, and they informed me that you don't take the stand and you don't speak unless we think we're losing, and we need you to take the stand. So at no time in my case in my court martial, did they ever think we were losing. To the day where they read the verdict, both of my attorneys, the government appointed attorney and my the attorney I hired, they assumed I believe the prosecutor believed that we were going to, that it was going to be not guilty.
Same here.
So it was a
He
huge,
said that.
yeah, it was the room went incredibly silent when they read the guilty verdict. But I want to go back, Teresa, to what you mentioned before. The responsibility that this lies in is the leadership or the lack thereof of people who didn't do the right thing earlier on, when things were swept under, when there was MST and people were harmed, and and it was swept under the rug. And so therefore, just like everything else in our society, let's swing that pendulum to the far extreme, and they still are not doing their jobs.
No.
So we're not
No.
going to be able to rely on these people doing their jobs. It's never going to happen.
Right.
So we got to do something else.
Right. And that's why we're here,
That's
because
why we're here.
I'm
Yeah.
convinced that they will not do their jobs until enough people get mad about it and
Absolutely.
start talking all over social media about it.
Yeah.
And then
And it's not
they
just
realize
that.
that,
People are dying still. People are still dying because of this. Like they're either taking their own life or there's other things that happen. You know, people tend to deal with things differently. They start abusing drugs and alcohol. I mean, there's so many different elements that an individual can resort to that for self-infliction because they don't know what to do in such a situation. And like you said, there's still people in there right now who we can get out. So if there's anybody we can get out, right? You know, that's what we need to start with, and then the people from behind. You know, hey, we can, as long as we get to them. You know, my prayers will be answered,
right.
essentially.
Right. And someone had a question on here, and I really don't know how to answer it. And I don't know if either one of you gentlemen can, but he just said, well, by the way, we have had so many comments, and I do apologize that I haven't been bringing in all the comments in here. Lauren Palladini has been on the show. Has been watching. She was my guest who had the medical malpractice case. Highly recommend you guys watch that podcast. She's been commenting throughout. A bunch of people have been commenting. So I'll definitely go back through YouTube, Facebook, and LinkedIn and make sure that I'm getting all these comments on here. So thank you so much for all of you who have stayed with us. I know this show did go way over the hour, but I believe that it was important to show this story. And Darin, we're not going to probably have time to get into it, but there's a whole nother story and a chapter in your book that I found very insightful about life in the brig. And we really
Yeah.
didn't get into that, but that is a whole nother animal about the way that service members are treated while they're in the
Yeah.
brig. And
It
Keith,
is it is
you're
the
shaking your
Stanford
head.
study. It's the Stanford
It's
study, like in real life. You would never expect it. As disciplined people who have been trained in the military, you would never expect it until you see it. It would blow your mind. the stuff
And
that
Keith, I didn't know that you
yeah.
experienced the same thing because I haven't had you on my show yet. But it sounds like your experience at the brig was not so great either.
No, and of course it's not meant to be, but the they didn't. There was no follow of any type of law there, so I understand that when we took an oath that we gave up certain rights, but human rights are not negotiable, and I'm aware of many cases, uh, including myself, that it's there was criminal activity involved, and it's not okay. It's not okay for us to do it to anyone else, and it's not okay for them to
No,
do it to us. Um,
no.
if the same actions were being done in a federal penitentiary, these people would have had relief. Uh, Attorneys would absolutely love to work with people in that manner, with that type of evidence to show what what's happening to them when they're being incarcerated, and we don't have that right. We don't have that ability.
No. The problem is that the military is a secret society for some reason where certain things aren't discussed. So they get discussed on the Stories of Service podcast. And Darin, I think one of the
Yeah.
things that really shocked me, I want to just leave the audience at least with one detail of what happened at the brig. And I believe that's that story that you shared about how if you were a sex offender, they would do certain things to try to see if they could discover who the people were who were convicted, who were guilty and who were not guilty. Is that correct? Am I remembering that right from the book?
That is correct, and they'll come at you. I mean, their goal is to get you to confess that you did something, that you broke the law. But it seemed like it was by all means necessary, and it was so ridiculous that the psychiatrist that I initially was working with left because she could see in between the lines, and she was like, "I don't want a part of this." So she left. She didn't want a part of what was going on, and she was the only psychiatrist there, and everybody else were social workers.
Right.
And so she bolted, and uh,
Well,
everybody knows everybody on the inside knows what happened on the inside, and
there's a lot of people that know what's going on with this. There's a lot of JAGs. There's a lot of
yeah,
investigators. There's a lot of
yeah,
judges. There's a lot of
right,
media. There's a lot of
right,
people who I would think know this is happening and it's on their conscience. And there are opportunities and there are ways to share those stories. And I always say, too, sometimes the win isn't in getting justice because sadly, like you said, Keith, there is no justice sometimes. Sometimes the win is just knowing you're not alone and knowing
yeah,
there's no shame in it. This
right,
happened and you can't be bitter, like Keith says. You can't be angry. You've got to move on. But there's other people that have experienced it and there's support if you need it. Right, Darin?
right, absolutely. We're always here. The networks that we had when I first got out, I was helping with Save Our Heroes because they were more geared towards following the sexual assault stuff. Uh, uh, you in your exploration, you're going to find all types of people who will help advocate, but anybody that I believe that you can reach out to for sure. You can absolutely reach out to Arvis. Arvis will point you in the right direction. You can absolutely reach out to me. I'm more, like I said, I'm an information guy. I can give you all the information. Like I said, we can go for 8 hours, and I can tell you the whole story and not bounce around and be nonlinear. But we had an hour, and we went over that, and so it's very difficult. And it's been a while since I've been a public speaker, so and it's an emotional topic for me. And so I wish I could have gave you a better presentation tonight, and because we barely scratched the surface of this. I just hope that people go to the website. If you have time, read the book. If you don't care about who I was before any of this, go straight to chapter 4 or 5. and then read what happened after that, so you'll learn about all these things. And the big part is that there's resources. Keith, for example, I reached out to Keith, and at one point, and it's not Keith particularly, but other people too, we flip flop. Like it sometimes, like you'll talk to that person, and like there was somebody very influential that they had their case overturned at some point, where I remember talking to him off a ledge plenty of times. Like he was just like his voice, you could hear it in his voice. His wife couldn't reach him. Like nobody could speak to him, but he would talk to me, and I was like, "Hey man, I'm here. I understand. Like I'm just as confused as you are." But now that we have all the facts, learning about the facts can help you have some peace. Reaching out to people like Keith, I wasn't gonna I was so close to not coming forward and doing this, because I used to be a public speaker. I used to give presentations all the time, and I haven't done that in a very long time at this point. So I've been in research mode and all of that. When I reached out to Keith the other day, surprisingly, I was not expecting to get more relief out of what Keith had to say. And I know that Keith is now in a very good position to be helpful as an advocate, because he already advocated and was able to help me in my in my time of need. And it happened so quick. And it was just, I was just very thankful. And once again, Keith, I want to say thank you, because there's not a lot of people out there. Arvis, like I can call Arvis. There's a handful of people out there you can still call. A lot of people who won their cases, they get NDAs, they don't talk about nothing anymore. So there are resources out there. Um, and if you want to know who those resources are, or if you have questions about them, you can reach out to me. I'll vet them. I'll do whatever I can. You can reach out. I'm sure you would vet them just as just as well if they reached out to you. But there's resources out there, so don't ever think you're alone. And the other thing is this: if it happens to you, and this comes your direction, just remember we live in the age of AI. We have so many resources and tools to use. So if somebody's coming against you and you're confused, you have all the tools you need. You have the organizations, you have us, advocates all over the place. You have podcasters who will send you to the right advocates, I believe. And you have, like I said, my website and my book will equip you with all the stuff and all the tricks that they have, so you know better walking into any situation, that they don't stand a chance. That's ultimately what the goal.
Thank you, Darin. And before we close out the call, did you have anything else you wanted to add, Keith? I know, like I said, I know we have been so long, and the audience has been amazing. Like the numbers have stayed the same throughout the call, which tells me that this is a very much a very high public interest item. And I definitely think somebody even said, no, I am angry. I haven't seen my kids in 9 years because of this. I've been angry for the last decade. And I'm angry too. And I want nothing more than us to be doing something about this today. And I want nothing more than to see justice. But I also want people to be healed. So over to you, Keith, for any closing thoughts.
Yes, thank you. I offer that do something with that anger. Don't let it just seed. If you can share this story, do due diligence that we didn't receive ourselves. Don't take our words
Right.
for it.
Right.
Do the investigation. Just read. Just look it up. There's plenty of information out there, and share it just with one other person. Put it on your threads. Get the information out there. This affects everyone. People, you want to ask, why does it bother me? What's the point? This affects the entire nation, the entire way of life. I can't look at a young person, male or female, and in good grace suggest that they join the military right now, because of what I've seen behind that curtain. There's just no justice for either side.
Right.
There's no so until they get their act together, which, you know, there's nothing new under the sun. This has been going on for since the beginning of time. But it's not just one person to be able to speak up and change things. It's a group of people organized that can change it. And if you rely on the military or the government to do that, I'm sorry, it's just not going to happen.
Right.
So if you're angry, good. If you're upset, good. Do something with that. And
Absolutely.
And, I
Absolutely.
promise that you'll be a better person for you. You'll come on out. The other side, I keep thinking of President 𝐒𝐢𝐥𝐿 Coolidge's quote, "The nation which forgets its defenders will be itself forgotten." It's not going to happen. It's happening. We see it. We see it in media and school and in television. If you think the nation is better off than it was 20 years ago or 25 years ago when I joined and I took an oath to protect and defend the Constitution, if it's better off today than it was then ignore everything I'm saying. But if you think it needs an azimuth check and to change course drastically, then I invite you to join the team and do something.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
All right.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you so much to both of you. I'm going to go full screen and just say goodbye to the audience, and I will meet you backstage just to say goodbye very quickly.
Yeah.
But I want to
Hey,
thank
Teresa, remember this. Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere.
Yeah, it's so true. It's so true. And I thank you, Darin, for having the courage
It's
to
the
share
least
your
I can
story
do.
tonight. I thank you, Keith, for helping Darin share his. I was say, I
Yeah, thanks, Keith.
think my camera's going out a little. That is also the sign that it's time to go. But thank you to both of you guys, and I'll meet you backstage. I'm going to go full screen. Thank you all. I know this was an almost 2-hour-long podcast, but I believe it was worth it to get out this important information. And just like they both said, if this cause is important to you, if you want more information, you can reach out to me. I have a whole page dedicated to my website on Teresa's Tapestries. You can look that up, and it's called False Accusations. There's a lot of resources on there. Arvis Owens is another person to reach out to. He was on my first podcast, and he has been instrumental in bringing a lot of the advocates together. So there are resources to learn more. Don't just take our word for it. Read the court transcripts. Read Darin's book. This is a systemic issue that must be fixed. And with your help, I think we can fix it. So with that, as I always say, take care of yourselves, take care of each other, enjoy the rest of your evening. Bye-bye now.